The forest floor was a traitor. Every fallen log, slick with emerald moss, threatened to betray her with a crack. Every patch of mud wanted to suck at her boots, to steal the precious seconds she needed to look convincingly clumsy. Elara moved through the twilight woods, a ghost of a hunter, her senses screaming with the proximity of the stag she was supposed to be tracking while every muscle in her body worked to fail. Rain dripped from the heavy pine boughs, tracing cold paths down her neck, plastering strands of dark hair to her cheek. She could smell the stag, its musk, the scent of the ferns it had crushed underfoot. She could hear the frantic beat of its heart. And she was deliberately, painstakingly, letting it get away. This was the final trial of the lunar hunt. A test of skill, of instinct, of worthiness. For the other contenders, it was the chance of a lifetime, to be chosen as Luna by one of the allied alphas, to be elevated, revered. For Elara, it was a death sentence she was desperately trying to outrun. Her own alpha, Marcus Blackwood, had not entered her for glory. He'd entered her as a bargaining chip, a prize to be won by Alpha Vorlag of the Crimson Fang Pack, a brute whose cruelty was whispered about in hushed, terrified tones. Winning meant trading one cage for another, more ornate, but infinitely more brutal. Failure was her only path to freedom, a narrow, thorny track she had to navigate under the watchful eyes of a dozen powerful predators. She let her shoulder clip a low-hanging branch, the thud unnaturally loud in the quiet woods. She winced, a performance of frustration for any unseen judges. A flicker of movement to her left, a squirrel chittering in alarm, and she forced herself to jerk her head toward it, a novice's mistake. Look incompetent. Look weak. Look unworthy. The mantra had been her shield for 3 days. But a new scent had drifted on the damp air an hour ago, throwing her carefully constructed panic into genuine disarray. It wasn't the familiar sense of her Blackwood pack, nor the cloying, iron-tinged odor of Vorlag and his fangs. This was something else. Cold stone, winter air, and the sharp, clean scent of pine after a frost. It was power, ancient and unyielding. It belonged to Kaelan Ironhide, the alpha of the Stonefang pack. A rival. A neutral observer in this political matchmaking, but a man whose presence felt like a physical weight on the entire forest. She knew he was watching. She couldn't see him, but she could feel his gaze, a pressure against her spine, as sharp and unnerving as a blade's edge. It was different from the leering gazes of the other alphas. It was analytical. Dissecting. He wasn't watching her fail, he was watching her act at failing. The thought sent a tremor of pure terror through her. The stag broke through the undergrowth ahead, a magnificent creature with a rack of antlers like a thorny crown. The moment of truth. She drew her bow, the yew smooth and familiar in her grip. This was the shot. The one she had to miss. She pulled the string taut, her muscles screaming with the practiced ease she was trying to hide. She aimed high, sighting a point a good 2 feet above the animal's shoulder. She let the breath out of her lungs, a shaky, deliberate tremble, and released. The arrow flew, a dark streak against the bruised purple sky, and buried itself harmlessly in the trunk of an ancient oak. The stag, startled, bolted into the deeper shadows and was gone. A wave of relief, so potent it almost buckled her knees, washed over her. It was done. She'd failed. Spectacularly. She lowered the bow, letting her shoulders slump in a pantomime of defeat. She stood there for a long moment, letting the rain wash over her, a baptism of failure. You can't your elbow too high on the release. The voice was low, a gravelly resonance that vibrated through the soles of her boots. It came from the shadows to her right. Elara spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. Kaelan Ironhide stepped from behind a curtain of weeping willow, moving with a silence that was terrifying for a man of his size. He was everything the stories said, tall, broad-shouldered, with hair as black as a raven's wing and eyes the color of a stormy sky. The lines of his face were harsh, carved from granite, but it was the sheer, uncompromising force of his presence that stole the air from her lungs. "Alpha," she stammered, dropping into a submissive bow, her head lowered. I didn't see you." "That was the point," he said, his voice devoid of warmth. He stopped a few feet from her, his scent overwhelming her senses. A hunter who doesn't see a 200-pound wolf in her periphery is no hunter at all. Yet you tracked a panicked stag through a rainstorm for 3 miles without faltering once. Ice flooded her veins. The storm washed out the trail. "I was lucky." He took a step closer. She had to fight the instinct to retreat. Showing fear to an alpha like him was like showing teeth to a rival. It was a challenge. Luck doesn't account for the way you tested the wind before each clearing. Or the way your footing on that slick rock was perfect, until the moment you chose to slip. You didn't miss that shot, you aimed to miss. "I saw you sight the oak tree." It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact. Her carefully constructed lie crumbled into dust at her feet. She looked up, her fear warring with a spark of defiance. His grey eyes were locked on hers, and in their depths, she saw no judgment, only an unnerving, relentless curiosity. "I don't know what you're talking about," she whispered, her voice betraying her. "Don't you?" He closed the remaining distance between them, his sheer size blocking out the dying light. He was so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body, a stark contrast to the cold rain. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a low growl that was for her alone. "You move with the grace of a predator trying to disguise itself as prey. You are sabotaging your own trial. The only question is why." His proximity was suffocating. The air crackled, charged with a tension that had nothing to do with the storm. And then it happened. Deep in her core, something ancient and dormant stirred. A jolt, sharp and electric, shot through her, a current connecting them. The scent of him, pine and winter and stone, suddenly wasn't just a scent. It was a call. A recognition. A deep, primal part of her soul uncoiled and whispered a single, impossible word, "Mate." Horror, stark and absolute, crashed over her. She saw the shock register in his eyes, his pupils dilating as the same recognition slammed into him. His nostrils flared, and a low, possessive growl rumbled in his chest, an involuntary sound of discovery. She stumbled back, breaking the connection, her hand flying to her mouth. No. Not him. Not another alpha. Not another cage. This was worse, so much worse. A fated bond was a chain she could never break. His expression hardened, the shock replaced by a mask of cold fury and something else, something that looked terrifyingly like resolve. He had not just uncovered her secret. He had uncovered a secret that now belonged to him, too. And an alpha like Kaelin Ironhide did not let go of what was his. The clearing where the alphas waited was a tense circle of power. Fires blazed in stone pits, casting flickering shadows against the grim faces of the pack leaders. Marcus Blackwood stood beside the hulking form of Alpha Vorlag, a smug, proprietary smile on his face. He saw Alara approaching, mud-splattered and empty-handed, and his smile widened. His plan had worked. She looked like a failure, a disgrace. Vorlag would still take her, Marcus had ensured that, but she would go to him as a weakling, a charity case, with no power or standing of her own. Alara kept her eyes on the ground, her heart hammering against her ribs. Kaelin walked a few paces behind her, a silent, menacing shadow. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but there was nowhere to go. The mate bond was a low, insistent hum beneath her skin, a phantom limb connecting her to the man she now feared more than any other. The elder overseeing the trials, a wizened wolf named Gannon, stepped forward. "Alara of the Blackwood Pack," he announced, his voice raspy with age. "You return last, and with no kill. The trial is concluded." Marcus stepped forward, his voice oozing false disappointment. "A poor showing, I'm afraid. She is young. Perhaps not ready for such a responsibility, he glanced at Vorlag. But our alliance is strong. Alpha Vorlag has graciously agreed to take her under his tutelage, to train her. It was a lie, polished for public consumption. Vorlag wouldn't train her, he would break her. Vorlag grunted, his small, piggish eyes raking over Alara with a look that made her skin crawl. She will learn obedience, he growled. This was it. The moment she had fought so hard for, and so hard against. She had failed the trial, but she was still being handed over to her tormentor. The bitter taste of despair filled her mouth. She did not fail. Kaelin's voice cut through the clearing like a whip crack. Every head turned. He stepped out of the shadows, his face a mask of cold command. The air grew thick, heavy with his power. Marcus's smile faltered. Alpha Ironhide, the elder said cautiously. You were an observer. You have no voice in this. I have a voice when the laws are being perverted, Kaelin countered, his grey eyes locking onto Marcus. I witnessed her hunt. She tracked the stag with a skill I have not seen in a decade. She had the kill shot. She chose not to take it. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. His gaze swept over the assembled alphas, cold and challenging. She was not competing for the prize. She was actively refusing it. A murmur went through the crowd. Marcus's face paled, then flushed with rage. These are baseless accusations. The girl is incompetent. She failed. She is many things, Kaelin said, his voice dropping to a dangerous low. Incompetent is not one of them. She is strong. She is clever. And she is unwilling to be a piece in another alpha's game. His eyes found Alara's, and for a heart-stopping second, the entire world narrowed to the space between them. The bond flared, a searing heat that left her breathless. He saw her terror, her desperation. And he made a choice. He took a deliberate step forward, planting himself directly in front of Alara, a living shield between her and the other alphas. You are all fools, he snarled, his voice resonating with the pure, untamed power of his rank. You looked at a queen and saw only a pawn. He turned his head slightly, his gaze locking with Marcus's. You sought to trade her. Vorlag sought to break her. You both misunderstood her value. And you both have lost her. He raised his voice, a formal declaration that echoed off the ancient stones. By the old law, by the right of the fates, I invoke the mate's claim. Gasps rippled through the clearing. This was a law so ancient, so absolute, it superseded any trial, any alliance. Alara of the Blackwood Pack is my fated mate. Her will does not belong to Blackwood. Her life does not belong to Crimson Fang. She belongs with me. She belongs to Stonefang. Chaos erupted. Marcus lunged forward with a roar of pure fury, his claws extending. You lie. She is mine to give. But Kaelin's beaters were already moving. Two massive wolves, their loyalty absolute, materialized at his sides, their snarls peeling back from their teeth. They formed a wall around Alara, their bodies tense, ready for war. Kaelin didn't even flinch. He met Marcus's enraged glare with an expression of utter, chilling calm. Challenge me, and I will tear your pack from the map, Blackwood, he stated, his voice soft but carrying the weight of an avalanche. She is mine. The matter is closed. Alara stood frozen in the eye of the storm, the world spinning around her. She had tried to escape one cage, only to be thrown into another. A gilded cage, perhaps, but a cage nonetheless, forged by a fate she had never asked for and claimed by an alpha who had stolen her future with a handful of words. She was no longer a pawn. She was Kaelin Ironhide's prize, his fated mate, his claimed possession. And she had no idea if she had been saved or damned. The journey to the Stonefang territory was a blur of rain-soaked forests and tense silence. Elara was wedged between Kaelin's beaters, Borin and Lyra, in the back of a rugged transport vehicle. They didn't speak to her, but their presence was a constant, suffocating reminder of her new reality. She was a captive. A spoil of a war she hadn't known was being fought over her. Kaelin sat in the front, his profile rigid, his eyes fixed on the winding mountain road. The bond between them was a taut wire, thrumming with unspoken tension. She could feel his awareness of her, just as she was agonizingly aware of him. The Stonefang compound was nothing like the decaying, desperate settlement of the Blackwood Pack. It was carved into the side of a mountain, a fortress of grey stone and dark timber, formidable and imposing. It radiated strength, order, and a kind of brutal permanence. Wolves in Stonefang colors, charcoal grey and white, stopped to watch their alphas return, their gazes curious and wary as they fell upon her. She was the stranger, the outsider, the rival pack's cast-off who was now, inexplicably, their alpha's mate. She was led not to a cell, but to a suite of rooms in the heart of the alpha's lodge. The rooms were spacious, with a roaring hearth, furs thrown over a large bed, and a balcony that overlooked a breathtaking, storm-shrouded valley. It was more luxury than she had ever known. A gilded cage. Kaelin followed her into the room, dismissing his beaters with a curt nod. The heavy oak door shut behind them, the sound echoing with a dreadful finality. They were alone. The air thickened, charged with the energy of the bond and the chasm of their circumstances. "You will be safe here," he said. It wasn't a reassurance. It was a decree. His voice was flat, his face unreadable. Elara finally found her own voice, and it was laced with the acid of her fear and resentment. "Safe? I have been passed from one alpha to another like a piece of property. You call that safety? I call it better than the alternative," he shot back, his grey eyes flashing. "Vorlag would have broken you for sport. Marcus would have watched. And you? What will you do, Alpha Ironhide?" she challenged, her chin lifting. "Keep me locked in this beautiful prison? Parade me as the mate you stole from your rivals?" A muscle feathered in his jaw. "I saved your life. You claimed it," she cried, her voice cracking. "You didn't ask me what I wanted. You saw something you desired, and you took it, just like all the others. You invoked a law that binds me to you whether I wish it or not. How is that different from what Marcus tried to do?" His face hardened into a mask of stone. "The difference," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl, "is that I will not harm you. The difference is that the bond is real. You felt it. I felt it. The fates chose this, not me. The fates didn't give me a choice," she whispered, wrapping her arms around herself. "And neither did you." He stood there for a long moment, the silence stretching between them, thick with her defiance and his frustration. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and for a fleeting instant, she saw a flicker of something other than command in his eyes. A flash of conflict, of uncertainty. Then it was gone, shuttered away behind the Alpha's impenetrable facade. "Get some rest," he said, his voice clipped. "Lyra will bring you food. We will talk in the morning." He turned and left, the door closing softly behind him, leaving her alone with the crackling fire and the roaring tempest of her own heart. She was safe from Marcus. She was safe from Vorlag. But she was trapped, bound to a man who was a stranger, a rival, an alpha who saw her as his destiny, his property. And she would fight him, and the bond, and this cruel fate, with every last breath she had. Days bled into a week. Elara existed in a state of suspended animation. Lyra, Kaelin's beater, a tall she-wolf with sharp eyes and an even sharper tongue, became her reluctant keeper. She brought meals, changes of clothes, and answered Elara's questions with curt, efficient responses. Lyra didn't trust her. Elara could see it in the way she held herself, the way her eyes never left Elara's hands. But there was no malice in her, only a fierce loyalty to her alpha and her pack. Elara learned about Stonefang not through conversation, but through observation. From her balcony, she watched the life of the pack unfold. She saw Kalen training his warriors in the main yard, his movements fluid and brutal, a masterclass in controlled violence. But she also saw him stop to correct a young pup's stance with surprising patience, his large hand gentle on the child's shoulder. She saw him preside over a dispute between two pack members over hunting territory, listening to both sides with an unwavering stillness before delivering a judgment that was harsh, but undeniably fair. He was not Marcus. He was not a tyrant who ruled through fear. He ruled through strength, and it was a strength that seemed to earn respect, not demand it. The knowledge was unsettling. It was easier to hate a monster. Hating a man who was a just, if severe, leader was a more complicated affair. The bond remained a low, constant hum, a background awareness of him that she could not shut out. She knew where he was in the compound at all times, a faint pull in his direction, a subtle shift in the air when he drew near. She fought it, building walls of anger and resentment around her heart, but it was like trying to dam a river with sand. One evening, a commotion in the yard drew her to the balcony. A patrol had returned, and they were carrying one of their own. Borin, Kalen's other beater, had a deep gash on his arm, bleeding sluggishly. Kalen was there in an instant, his face grim. He helped get the injured wolf to the infirmary, his orders ringing out across the yard, calm and controlled. Later, long after the compound had settled into the quiet rhythms of the night, Elara couldn't sleep. She paced her room, the image of the injured wolf replaying in her mind. Driven by an impulse she didn't understand, she slipped out of her rooms and made her way toward the infirmary. She found Kalen alone in his study, a room of dark wood, leather, and the scent of old books. He was slumped in a chair by the fire, his head in his hands. A half-empty bottle of harsh-smelling whiskey sat on the table beside him. For the first time, he didn't look like an alpha. He just looked tired. He looked up as she entered, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. The alpha mask was gone, and in its place was a raw vulnerability that startled her. "A rogue pack on the southern border," he said, his voice rough. "Amateurs. But even an amateur with claws can get lucky." He gestured to a small cut on his own forearm, a thin line of red she hadn't noticed before. It was already closing, his alpha healing kicking in, but a dark, herbal-smelling salve had been smeared over it. Without thinking, Elara moved to the cabinet where she'd seen medical supplies. She took out a clean cloth and a small pot of the same salve. She approached him cautiously, as if he were a wolf she wasn't sure was friend or foe. "You should clean it properly," she said, her voice soft. He watched her, his expression unreadable, but he didn't pull away. He held out his arm. Her fingers trembled slightly, as she gently wiped away the old salve and the dried blood. Her touch was light, clinical, but the moment their skin connected, the bond flared. It was not a jolt this time, but a slow, spreading warmth, a current of deep, resonant rightness that flowed from her fingertips up her arm. She heard his sharp intake of breath, felt the muscles in his forearm tense. She worked in silence, applying a fresh layer of the healing salve. Her proximity, the intimate nature of the task, stripped away the layers of anger and defiance, leaving something fragile and raw exposed. "Why did you do it?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "Why did you throw the trial?" She finished wrapping a light bandage around the cut, her hands moving with practiced surety. "Marcus promised me to Alpha Vorlag," she said, not looking at him. "It was part of a treaty to secure his southern border. My consent was not a factor." The air in the room grew cold. She could feel the rage rolling off him in palpable waves, a dangerous, barely contained storm. "Vorlag," he bit out, the name a curse. "I've heard the stories about how he treats his females." "They are all true," she said, her voice flat and empty. "I grew up in the Blackwood pack. I know what happens to she-wolves who are seen as property. I would rather have died in that forest than go with him. He was silent for a long time. She finally dared to look up at him. The exhaustion was gone from his eyes, replaced by a terrifying, protective fury. It was a fury directed at Marcus, at Vorlag. It was a fury on her behalf. He will never touch you, Kaelin vowed, his voice thick with a promise that felt as solid as the mountain around them. I will burn his entire pack to the ground before I let him near you. And in that moment, seeing the savage sincerity in his eyes, a tiny, treacherous crack appeared in the wall around her heart. He had still taken her, still claimed her without her permission. But perhaps he had done it not just to possess her, but to protect her. The thought was a dangerous seed of hope she wasn't ready to let grow. Not yet. The uneasy peace of the compound was shattered a few nights later. Elara was jolted from a light sleep by a sound that didn't belong, the scrape of a boot on the stone of her balcony. Her heart seized. The guards posted outside her door were a deterrent, but someone had bypassed them. She was a target. She rolled silently from the bed, grabbing the heavy iron poker from the hearth. Her body moved on pure instinct, a creature of survival. A shadow detached itself from the deeper shadows of the balcony, a sleek, dark form slipping through the open doors. Then another. Two of them. They moved with a predatory grace, their scent alien and wrong. Assassins. Marcus hadn't taken his loss lying down. Fear, cold and sharp, tried to paralyze her, but something else rose to meet it, a white-hot surge of fury. She would not be a victim. Not here. Not ever again. The first assassin lunged, a blade glinting in the moonlight. Elara didn't scream. She didn't cower. She reacted. She swung the heavy poker, deflecting the knife with a ringing clang of metal on metal. The force of the blow jarred her arm, but she used the momentum to pivot, putting the large oak table between her and her attackers. A feisty one, the second assassin rasped, circling around the other side. They were hemming her in. A primal terror threatened to swallow her, the terror of being cornered, of being overpowered. It was the feeling she'd spent her whole life running from. But as they closed in, something deep within her, something she had suppressed for years, broke free. It started as a tremor in the floorboards, a vibration that hummed up through the soles of her feet. The potted plants on the windowsill began to tremble, their leaves rustling in the still air. The assassins paused, glancing at each other in confusion. The vibration grew stronger, a low thrumming that seemed to emanate from Elara herself. She felt a connection to the stone beneath her, to the very bones of the mountain. It was an ancient power, a latent magic she had inherited from a bloodline she knew nothing about, a strength she had always been taught to fear and hide. The first assassin charged again. Elara threw out a hand, not in defense, but in command. From the stone hearth, a jagged shard of rock tore itself free and shot across the room like a missile. It struck the assassin in the shoulder, throwing him back with a cry of pain and surprise. The second one stared, his eyes wide with disbelief. "What are you?" Before she could answer, the door to her rooms burst open. Kaelin stood there, a vision of absolute feral rage. He took in the scene in a fraction of a second, the injured assassin, the second poised to strike, Elara standing her ground with the floor vibrating around her. He didn't hesitate. He launched himself across the room, a blow of motion and fury, and the fight was over in a matter of brutal, efficient seconds. When it was done, two unconscious bodies lay on the floor and the room was a wreck. Kaelin stood panting in the middle of it, his eyes wild. He turned to Elara, his gaze sweeping over her, checking for injuries. The vibration in the floor subsided as her adrenaline receded, leaving her shaking. He strode toward her, his expression a mixture of awe, shock, and a fierce, blazing pride. He stopped in front of her, his eyes fixed on her face. "Geomancy," he breathed, the word full of reverence. "The magic of the earth." A bloodline thought lost for centuries. He now understood. He understood everything. Why Marcus wanted to control her, why Vorlag would have paid any price. She wasn't just a skilled tracker. She wasn't just a potential Luna. She was a weapon. A powerhouse of rare, elemental magic. He reached out, his hand gently cupping her jaw, his thumb stroking her cheek. His touch was grounding, chasing away the last of her tremors. "You are so much more than I ever imagined," he murmured, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name. It was then, looking into his stormy grey eyes, that she realized the attack hadn't just exposed her power. It had changed the very foundation of their relationship. He wasn't looking at a possession he needed to protect anymore. He was looking at an equal. The aftermath of the attack settled a new kind of quiet over the Stonefang compound. A respectful quiet. The story of the Lunar Claim, who could command the very stone of the mountain, spread like wildfire. The pack's wary curiosity toward Alara shifted into a palpable awe. She was no longer just the Alpha's mate, she was a power in her own right. The biggest shift, however, was in Kalen. The dynamic between them was irrevocably altered. He came to her the following day, not in her rooms, but in the War Council chamber, a cavernous room dominated by a massive stone table carved with a map of the territories. His beaters, Borin and Lyra, were there, their expressions solemn. Kalen didn't stand over her. He gestured to the chair beside his own at the head of the table. A chair for an advisor. A chair for a partner. "Marcus won't stop," he said, his voice devoid of any pretense. "Last night was an assassination attempt. Next will be an open challenge. He can't afford the humiliation of what I did, and now that he knows your power is awakening, he will see you as a threat he must eliminate or reclaim." He looked at her, his gaze direct and stripped of all dominance. "I brought you here to keep you safe. I claimed you to protect you. I was wrong. I shouldn't have made that choice for you. Your power is your own. Your life is your own. So now, I am giving you the choice I should have given you from the start." He took a deep breath, the admission costing his alpha pride. "I can arrange for you to be taken to the neutral territories in the north. The Silverwood Coven owes me a debt. They would shield you, keep you hidden. You would be safe, and you would be free. Of Marcus, of Vorlag, and of me. The claim would be broken by distance and time. The bond would fade." He paused, and she saw the flicker of loss in his eyes. "Or you can stay. Stay and fight with us. Not as my protected mate, but as my ally. As Stonefang's ally. We need your strength. I need your strength. The choice is yours, Alara. No bond, no claim, will force you to stay." It was the most terrifying and liberating moment of her life. He was offering her an escape. Everything she thought she wanted. Freedom. Anonymity. A life without alphas and their games. She could walk away from the bond that terrified her, from the man who confused and compelled her in equal measure. She looked at the map on the table, at the circle marking Blackwood territory. She thought of Marcus's sneering face, of a lifetime spent looking over her shoulder, of being small and silent and afraid. Running would keep her safe, but it would not make her free. Freedom wasn't the absence of a cage. It was the power to choose your own battle. "If I go," she asked, her voice quiet but steady, "what will happen to you?" "To Stonefang. Marcus will use your departure as proof that my claim was false," Kalen answered honestly. "He will rally other packs who feel I overstepped. There will be a war." She met his gaze, and for the first time, she did not look away. She saw the alpha, the leader, the warrior. But she also saw the man who had looked at her with pride, who had offered her a choice at great personal cost. She had spent her life as a pawn. He was offering her the chance to be a queen. "I'm tired of running," she said, the words feeling truer than anything she had ever spoken. She stood up and placed her hand on the map, directly over the heart of the Stonefang territory. I will not run from Marcus. I will help you end him. I stay. A slow smile spread across Kaelin's face, a rare and brilliant thing that transformed his harsh features. It was not the smile of an alpha who had won, but of a man who had just found his equal. Lyra and Boren exchanged a look of profound relief and respect. In that moment, in that stone chamber, Ilara stopped being a captive. She became a combatant. She chose her ground, she chose her allies, and for the first time, she felt the bond not as a chain, but as an anchor in the coming storm. Their alliance forged a new intimacy, one built in the sweat of the training yard and the late-night quiet of the war room. Kaelin began to teach her how to control her gift. They would go deep into the mountain caves, where she could practice without fear of bringing the compound down around them. He taught her to feel the energy in the rock, to listen to the slow, deep heartbeat of the earth. In turn, she taught him things he'd never known. She showed him how to track not just by scent and sight, but by feeling the vibrations of movement through the ground, a secret of her newfound power. Their sparring sessions became a dance of charged energy. He would come at her with the full force of an alpha, and she would meet him not with muscle, but with her connection to the earth. The ground would ripple at her command, throwing him off balance. Small stones would fly from the walls to distract him. It was a battle of strength against magic, and it was intoxicating. More than once, a training session would end with them tangled together, breathless and laughing, the line between combat and caress blurring until the air between them was thick with unspoken longing. The emotional walls crumbled more slowly. One night, as they pored over maps, tracing Marcus's likely lines of attack, Kaelin fell silent. He reached out, his fingers gently tracing the faint, silvery scar above her eyebrow, a relic from her childhood in the Blackwood pack. He did this to you? Kaelin asked, his voice dangerously soft. Ilara flinched at the memory, but didn't pull away. I spoke out of turn, she said, her voice small. I was 7. Kaelin's hand tightened into a fist on the table, his knuckles white. He said nothing, but the fury that poured off him was a promise of vengeance more potent than any words. He then opened his hand and gently took hers. I have scars too, he said, turning his own hand over to show her the jagged white lines across his palm. My father was a hard alpha. He believed strength was beaten into a pup, not nurtured. He told her of his own harsh upbringing, of the lonely burden of becoming alpha too young, of the constant pressure to be unyielding, to be stone. He spoke of his fear of failing his pack, a vulnerability he would show no one else. As he spoke, Ilara felt the last of her resentment toward him dissolve, replaced by a profound empathy. He was not just an alpha. He was Kaelin. And he was as much a prisoner of his role as she had been of hers. Emboldened by his honesty, she found herself telling him everything. Not just the physical cruelties of Marcus's rule, but the insidious emotional abuse, the way he'd made her feel worthless, small, a thing to be used and discarded. She spoke of her long-suppressed magic, how she'd feared it as a curse that would only draw unwanted attention. He listened, his stormy eyes never leaving her face. When she finished, her voice choked with unshed tears, he didn't offer empty platitudes. He simply squeezed her hand. Your magic is not a curse, Ilara. It is your crown. And you were never worthless. He was just too blind to see your worth. Later that night, as she was about to return to her own rooms, she paused at his door. The bond was a warm, insistent pull, a longing for a closeness she no longer feared. She turned back. He was watching her, his expression a question. Taking a breath, she walked back to him. She stood before him, her heart pounding, and slowly, deliberately, she rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. It was a soft, tentative kiss, a question and a statement all in one. He froze for a second in surprise, and then his arms came around her, pulling her flush against his hard body. He deepened the kiss, but there was no dominance in it, no claiming. It was a kiss of reverence, of relief, of two lonely souls finally finding a home in one another. It was not the bond forcing them together. It was a choice. Her choice. And it was everything. The summons came at dawn. A challenge, delivered by a grim-faced envoy from a neutral pack. Marcus Blackwood, invoking the ancient right of territorial challenge, demanded a trial by combat against Kaelin. The prize was not land or titles. The prize was Alara. It was a desperate, arrogant move, designed to humiliate Kaelin by reducing his fated mate to a spoil of war. Marcus had allied himself with Vorlag and a handful of other disgruntled packs, and they were massed on the border of Stonefang territory. He believed Kaelin would have no choice but to accept, to fight for his honor. Kaelin stood on the battlements, staring out at the valley as the sun rose, painting the clouds in shades of blood and fire. Alara came to stand beside him. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly. "This is his game, played by his rules." "If I refuse, I show weakness," Kaelin said, his jaw tight. "He will attack with the full force of his alliance. Many of my people will die. So you will fight their alpha, a one-on-one battle, to save them?" she asked. "It is the alpha's way," he said grimly. No, Alara stepped in front of him, her eyes blazing with a fire that matched the sunrise. "It is the old way. We are going to show them a new way." She took his hand, her grip firm. "You are not his only target, Kaelin. I am. This fight is mine as much as it is yours. And we will not be fighting it alone." The challenge was to be met on a neutral plain at the foot of the mountains. Marcus arrived with his allies, a formidable force of snarling wolves and grim-faced warriors. He strode to the center of the field, arrogant and proud, expecting Kaelin to meet him there. Instead, the ground began to tremble. From the Stonefang side of the valley, Kaelin emerged, not alone, but at the head of his entire pack. And at his side, her head held high, was Alara. She was not dressed as a Luna, in silks and finery. She wore the leather armor of a Stonefang warrior. Marcus's sneer faltered as he saw her. "Hiding behind your woman, Ironhide," he bellowed. "I am not behind him," Alara's voice rang out, clear and strong, magically amplified by the resonating rock beneath them. "I am beside him. You challenged the alpha of Stonefang. You fool. You should have realized by now that there are two of us." With a cry, she slammed her hands onto the ground. The earth itself roared. A fissure cracked open in front of Marcus's advancing forces, a deep, impassable chasm in the dry earth. His warriors stumbled back in terror. From the sides of the valley, boulders, dislodged by her power, began to rain down on the flanks of his allies, sowing chaos and panic. Kaelin let out a battle cry, and the Stonefang warriors charged, a grey and white wave of disciplined fury, not into a disorganized mob, but into an enemy already broken and terrified by a power they could not comprehend. The battle was swift and decisive. But Alara's fight was not with the pack. It was with its alpha. She found Marcus as he tried to rally his men, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. "You think your little rock tricks can stop me, girl," he snarled, lunging for her. He was fast, but the earth was faster. A wall of stone erupted from the ground, blocking his path. She didn't attack him directly. She dismantled his world around him. She trapped his feet in grasping hands of rock, shattered his sword with a volley of sharp pebbles, and then, finally, she encased him from the waist down in solid stone, leaving him immobilized, a helpless statue of fury. Kaelin was at her side in an instant, his own blade at Marcus's throat. But Alara held up a hand. "No," she said. "His defeat is not death. It is humiliation." She looked down at the man who had tormented her for years, the man who saw her as nothing more than a thing. It's over, Marcus, she said, her voice cold and final. Your power is broken. Your allies have fled. You have nothing. She stripped him of his power not with a blade, but with the truth, spoken before the remnants of his own pack. She exposed his crimes, his cowardice, his secret dealings. She took away his authority, leaving him as nothing more than a weak, terrified man trapped in a prison of his own making. Her prison. The dust settled on the broken plain. The war was over. Marcus was overthrown, his pack suing for a peace they did not deserve, but that Kaelin, with Alara's counsel, granted with strict terms. Stonefang was not a pack of conquerors. They were protectors. That evening, as a sliver of moon rose over the high peaks, Kaelin led Alara to the heart of the mountain, to a hidden cavern lit by the soft glow of phosphorescent crystals. A quiet pool of crystal-clear water reflected the light, making the entire chamber shimmer like a star field. This was the heart of the mountain, the most sacred place in Stonefang territory. The first claim I made, Kaelin said, his voice soft in the echoing space, was for politics. For protection. It was an alpha's claim. It was not enough. He turned to her, his stormy eyes filled with a deep, abiding love. It was not right. He took her hands in his. I don't want to be your alpha, Alara. I want to be your partner. I don't want to claim you. I want to choose you, every day, for the rest of my life. And I want you to choose me. Tears welled in Alara's eyes, tears of joy, of release. The journey had been terrifying, a path forged through fear and defiance. But it had led her here. Not to a cage, but to a home. Not to a master, but to an equal. I choose you, Kaelin, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I choose this life. I choose us. This was their true bonding. Not a public declaration of ownership, but a quiet, sacred promise whispered in the heart of the living mountain. He leaned in and kissed her, a kiss that held the weight of battles won, of fears conquered, and of a future they would build together. The bond between them settled, no longer a tumultuous current, but a deep, calm, and unshakable river. She was not a prize he had won, nor a survivor he had saved. She was the queen who had chosen her own kingdom, and the king who was wise enough to rule beside her, not above her. She was home.